Bismillah, welcome to a new episode in which we see how do we rescue the SA510 SSD. This Western Digital drive, in my case, it was shipped with a firmware that is broken and it needed a critical upgrade, otherwise it will self-destruct. And what happened is that at some point it just didn't allow me to start it. There are many partitions in this device and neither of them were booting. When I tried to open it from multiple places, so basically I tried with Linux to open the machine, so I tried to recover in recovery mode. I tried like multiple ways and all of them were failing. I wasn't able to reach the data. What I was able to do for two partitions of them is that I was able to read the directories, but the third one I was not even able to read the directories, so neither files nor directories, nothing. And tried with the DD rescue, I was not able to get anything except bad sectors and errors. And I also tried to do the SmartCTL test and stuff like that. I was able only once to get the SmartCTL info, and it was after leaving the drive for some time not being used and then trying to reconnect it externally. I was able to get the SmartCTL with -A option to work, but after that it failed again. So at this point I start to figure out that it is a hardware issue and it's not a cable issue, because I tried with internal connection, with external connection, and with external connection to another machine, and all of them were failing. I tried to read the data under Windows and it was also failing. So Windows was not able to know the device, so it was even worse than in Linux. And the official upgrade of the firmware through the Western Digital dashboard utility was failing also, because the dashboard was getting into an exception. So at this point I start to figure out, based on the Reddit and YouTube and multiple sources, that the firmware is mandatory to be upgraded immediately after purchase, because there was an issue there. And if we just contact Western Digital, you'll probably be able to replace it, but recovering the data was almost impossible in all the resources that I've reached. My last attempt, which was working, thanks God. So the way to get it to work was to follow this framework guide and install the embedded Linux provided by Western Digital to upgrade from Linux directly. Let me show you here. So it's by Edward Felder, and this guide here, it just goes through how to install the firmware using the setup tool. So first you need the firmware, you need the setup tool, you need to have a USB stick that is bootable. So let's go through these steps one by one. So as I told you, you need a USB stick, you need a firmware, and you need the updater. How do you get the firmware? You'll go to the link that you want to download the firmware from, and these links I'll be keeping in the description in a guest. Just click it and download it, and then you need to also download the embedded Linux updater, and this is an updater coming from Western Digital themselves. Also, you have to format a USB stick to FAT32. If it's more than 32 gigabytes, be careful that Windows will not allow you to format to FAT32 in this case. And in my situation, I just partitioned this drive into smaller partition. Just use partition utility. Even in Windows, there is one there, and you just create a small partition, small volume inside the USB stick. And be careful that you are formatting the USB stick so it would be wiped. And then you just extract the zip file, the updater, and navigate to the image/2-esp, and then copy the content of it into the formatted stick, and also copy the firmware file to the stick. And next to both of them, you create an empty file named embedded-toolkit.cfg. It was reported in the comments that the steps did not work except with this empty file in place. Eventually you'll have this structure in the USB stick. So you'll have the firmware file, you'll have the empty CFG file, and you'll also have the files that you extracted from the image/2-USB. Next, we start with upgrading the firmware. I noticed that the smart CTL I was able to run it for once before, so I was assuming that maybe the device, when it's a bit colder, maybe that's better. So I just frozen the SSD in advance in case that would make any help. Just 5 minutes or something in the freezer. And then booted from the USB stick. When you boot from the USB stick, you'll have a UI. Let me show you how it looks like. So it looks something like that, and then you update the firmware and you need to select the device. In my situation, I did not connect the device in advance, so I put it into closure and then connected it after booting up. At this point, I clicked select device and then clicked rescan the devices, and then when it scanned the new device, I was able to ensure that this is correct device because it's just plugged in new, and any other device that was already there, these were not the devices I would wipe the firmware for. So be careful, because the device you are selecting is the device you are really wiping its firmware. And then for the binary name, you will have to input, like type by yourself, the name of the file that you are using. In our situation, it was 520.46100.fluf, and then continue. And if everything went fine, you will reach the upgrade completed. For your information, for how to compile the link, so basically you navigate to this link. I'll have it also in the guest, and you'll find a list of all devices. At this point, you can search for the SA510 2.5 form factor for your device specifically, and be careful to select the SSD, not the normal one without SSD, and then copy the link here and append it to the name of the website. So I have it open here. This is the link, device properties for this firmware. So this is the latest firmware they have, and you can see here that this depends on the one of these three versions, and the upgrade from 15 to 20 is the one that's really crucial. So basically, in my case, I was 520.15, and it's okay to move from this one to this one directly. So I just installed only this firmware. So how do you get the link to the firmware? You just replace the device underscore properties XML with 520.46100. So basically the same. You have a duplicate here, and then eventually you change XML to FLUF. And then when you click enter, you will be prompted with the download. And see you in the next episode.